Hello everyone, mega quick last minute introduction to this episode. We made it to Australia for Christmas. We made it all the way to the island state of Tasmania, which is where my parents have just moved. Just arrived here after what can only be described as the most complicated, nightmarish set of 3 flights with every single complication imaginable overcome. And we will be spending Christmas. My parents are already delighted to meet our little boy Otis. But this is where I'm going to be for the next couple of weeks. You'll have to forgive me if I'm very quiet on social media. Even you'll have to forgive me if there's no episode next week. But there you go. First time home in 5 years for me. First time I've seen my family in 3 years. And I'm happy to be back. Very, very different from Paris, where we ended up right now. There's sheep. I can see sheep as I'm recording this. And we left Paris looking very beautiful. The Christmas lights all over the place. If you are a Patreon member, I took everyone for a live walk down Rue Claire in the 7th. All the way down Rue Claire, left on Rue Saint-Dominique to the Eiffel Tower Sparkle Show. If you remember, it's the very top post on patreon.com/the Eiffel Tower. You can watch the replay. If you're not a member, it's the perfect time to sign up. Treat yourself or someone that you love to a membership for Christmas. And we also found the time to film my traditional scooter ride down the Champs-Élysées. I'll be uploading that to YouTube very soon. Make sure you're a subscriber. youtube.com/the Eiffel Tower. But that's enough of this quick introduction. I think I can hear my family calling in the background. I'll leave you with this episode recorded in Paris with a review of 2021 on the Eiffel Tower. Thank you very much and happy Christmas from me, Lena, and little Otis. G'day. You're listening to the Eiffel Tower podcast. My name's Oliver G. This is a show all about Paris. And typically at the end of the year, I like to do a sort of year in review, a best of, a look back at everything that's happened, which the idea is, if you're new around here, it'll give you a good idea of a place to start if you want to go back through some of the old episodes. Or if you've been rusted on from the beginning, it'll give you maybe that warm little feeling of nostalgia as you remember some of the episodes. But what I've got here is I've gone through the statistics. I've gathered up the very top episodes of 2021, spliced in with a few memories of my own. And usually I'd release this at the very end of the year, but I wanted to get a head start because, there's a good chance that I'm in Australia right now if you're listening to this. What an exciting concept for me. The first time in 5 years. Woohoo! Okay, so before we get into anything, a little note about 2021. Lots of personal news, which I'm sure you guys have seen on social media and on the podcast itself. The birth of our son in May, Otis. That was a real game changer and a life changer, really, for life outside of the podcast, obviously, but even for the podcast, I think it changed the angle of the way I look at the city a little bit. Also, it put a big shift on the way I record, and in the middle of the year, I released my memoir, Paris on Air, in audiobook form, while I enjoyed a little bit of time off to be a new dad, and that's a really good lead-in to this best of 2021, because that was one of the highlights. But first, a jingle. Yes, so 2021, the year in review, it was kind of interesting to see what the top episodes were. There are a few things that were kind of obvious to me, but a few sort of sneaky ones snuck in. I learned something that is it's both good and bad, I think. One of the things that sort of will always succeed on podcast episodes is if I do it based on a list. So, if I say 15 things you have to do before you go to Paris, or 11 things to find in Montmartre, they're just way more clickable. People just click on them more, which kind of, I don't know, it kind of plays with the statistics a little bit. Same way if you have a celebrity on the show and they share it with their followers, that episode's going to be more popular than the one that you do tracing, I don't know, a medieval wall around Paris. That's just the way it is. You get help sharing it. So these best of lists, I mean, it's not at all the best episodes, really, is it? It's just the ones that got the most downloaded read into it however you want, but I'm going to read through the top 5 of the year and play little smidgens from some of them. So coming in at number 5, believe it or not, was chapter 1 of Paris on Air, my audio experience. So if you're brand new around here, what I did during the lockdown, that first lockdown in Paris, is I took the book that I wrote about my life here and I turned it not into an audiobook, but an audio experience, and all the characters read their lines. I put music in, I put sound effects in. The idea was that listening to it would be a whole different experience to reading the book, and I'm doubly glad for doing it because it, like I said, it allowed me to have a bit of time off while it was released out on the podcast. But secondly, that you guys reacted very well to it. Chapter 1 sneaking into the top 5. That's a good sign. I'm not going to play any of it for you, but if you do want to go and check it out, that's just my book for free, and I think it'd make for perfect listening on a long road trip. So search for Paris on Air. It was released in May. Look at that, 22nd of May, so just before the baby was born. But number 4, and we'll play a bit from this one, the 4th most popular episode of 2021 was released in late September, so it hasn't even had time to accumulate the listens and the downloads like the other ones have. But this was An Idiot's Guide to Fashion in Paris with special guest Monica de la Villadière. So she's an Instagrammer, she's an influencer in Paris, she's a fashion writer, a podcaster even, and when we met in September, she talked all about fashion. We talked a lot about social media too, and she talked a lot about what people can wear in Paris, and it was recorded in the Trésor Jardin Café. Here's a little snippet. Women, when they come to Paris with these ideas of how to dress, do you think on average they're getting it right or very wrong, or you can be honest?
Yeah, I think they're getting it wrong.
Let's hear why.
Okay, there's no wrong way to dress. Let's just caveat that. Like, how you wake up in the morning and feel and want to feel is the great beauty of fashion, because it is just a constant cycle of creativity, and it's like wearable art that you can participate in and create every day. So that's my big caveat there. Like, there is no wrong or right way to dress, and I don't actually like when people say that. However,
that was a fun episode, and no doubt got an extra sort of hit of downloads from her followers who would have jumped in and had a listen to the episode. I believe maybe they subscribed and they hung around. Hello, fans of Monica. The episode actually prompted some feedback that I took on board. There are a few people that said, both men and I assume like wives of men, who said, can you not do the same episode specifically for males? I think there are people from around the world who are embarrassed of coming to Paris or being with their husband in Paris and feeling like that man has been shown up by all the Parisian men who are so well dressed typically. So funnily enough, one of my very good friends works in male fashion, and in the new year I'm going to sit down and chat to him for half an hour about what to wear if you're a man in Paris, but also sort of the faux pas, the mistakes that a lot of men seem to make. And I think a lot of you probably know what they are already, but why not hear it from a Frenchman? So that'll be coming in the new year. Skip ahead now to number 3 on the list. And speaking of list, this was the list of all lists, and it was my wife Lena and me revealing our bucket list for the year. So if you're unfamiliar with this concept, it's something I didn't come up with bucket list, of course, but I came up with doing it on the podcast a couple years back. And the concept is fun. Like, you pick 5 items, things that you want to do in Paris, whether you live here or whether you're visiting, and then you order them in order of difficulty. So for the first one, you put something like, a cafe on the other side of town that you've been meaning to check out and really easy to go visit and tick it off. The kind of thing you could do, you just haven't got around to doing it. And then it goes sort of more difficult. Maybe you need a reservation for the one at number 3. Maybe you need to spend the night somewhere for number 4. And number 5 is something that's, a big deal, traveling somewhere. Or as Lena's was in this exact episode, she wanted to stay in a luxury hotel in Paris. So that sharing of our list back in March turned out to be the 3rd most popular episode of the year. And what we'll do in early next year is we'll revisit that list to see how many of them we managed to tick off. Spoiler alert, I definitely did better than Lena on this one. And we'll come up with a new list for 2022. And a note on these lists, I really encourage you guys to get in on it as well. Make your own lists. Think of things that you want to do on your next trip to Paris. If you live here, it's just as easy to come up with a list. And perhaps we can do it as a team thing. Yeah, so in fact, because that was the first episode of the year and because it did so well, I turned it around to you guys and asked what you wanted to do in 2021. And then I turned that into the ultimate Paris bucket list. It was like 100 things to do. And then I sort of worked throughout the year to tick items off. Although it was harder than it seemed, especially with a new baby around. It's a lot harder to do things when you've got an infant, I've learned. But we did all right. So more on that in 2022, and we'll see how far we got through the main list as well. That brings us to number 2 on the list, and it's another influencer, a friend of the show. It's Véronique from France with Vero, and I sat down with her in February to talk about the apéro tradition. I remember it well. It was cold. We sat down by the Seine. It had just been flooding, I think, and it was a little bit kind of windy and cold, but a beautiful view. We sat right between the two islands, Ile de la Cité and Ile Saint-Louis, on the right bank, just near the Peloton Cafe, looking over it all, and Vero explained everything when it comes to the apéro tradition. For a brief recount of it, here's a clip from the show.
I think it's 3 things mostly, and you've touched on some of them. It's a ritual, definitely a beloved ritual in French life. And I think a lot of visitors adopt it as well, because it represents French life to them, I think. Number 2, it's an alcoholic beverage. So you'll refer to what you drink during the aperitif as an apéro, the drink itself.
Okay.
And number 3, it's a moment of the day. Because you don't have an apéro at 10 in the morning. You don't have an apéro at 3 p.m. usually. You have an apéro before a meal. That's what it used to be. So you would have an apéro at lunchtime.
Do you mean it's all 3 things? Are you hang on, just, I don't know if I understand. There you go, lovely Vero. She's since moved to Tours in central France, I guess. And I'm planning on paying her a visit in the new year. In fact, one of the things that Patreon members were very clear about when I have done some behind-the-scenes stuff on what I should do in upcoming episodes, very clear that people wanted to hear a little bit from outside of Paris. And whenever the Patreon supporters speak very clearly, I listen attentively. So you can expect more of that in the new year. As for Vero, you can find her France with Vero. Type it in wherever you want. You will be able to find her or listen to our episode from the 7th of February. Now, before we get into number 1, I want to take the chance to explain better what I mean when I say Patreon supporters, because I know some of you don't know what the heck I'm talking about. That is how this show is funded. Not just that. That pays the salary of me, that pays the salary of Lena, and that allows me to employ people like Eddie, who edits it, Augusta, who takes the photos. I've had help with things like YouTube before, and all the bills, everything pays my rent. Patreon. So if you appreciate this content, if you enjoy it, if you want to see it thrive, then why not sign up? $10 is the tier that I recommend because you get all the good stuff when you sign up there. You get the guide on sign up, you get access to all the videos, you can watch them live. Patreon.com/The Earful Tower. Christmas is coming up. Why not give yourself a gift? And as I always say, if you sign up, send me a message and introduce yourself. I love meeting you guys. Now, drum roll, Eddie. This brings us to the number 1 episode of 2021. And, well, I don't know how you define influencer anymore, but I guess you could say that it was an influencer. It was my guest. It was my wife, lovely Lena. What is an influencer anyway? She influences me sometimes. It was Lena and I talking about the 10 tourist mistakes to avoid in Paris. Now, this is an example. I think this shows a couple of things. This shows that the list episodes seem to really work. This is it also shows that you guys out there in listener world are curious about how to make the most of your Paris experience. It shows that I know from behind the scenes that the blog post that I made to go with this episode went kind of viral. it's something you want to click. I'll go through them really quick, the 10, so you don't have to listen to the episode, the 10 mistakes to avoid: falling for the scams, sitting at the cafes without a waiter's blessing, talking too loudly, essentially planning too much, stopping in the middle of the sidewalk, crossing at red lights, not learning 10 words of French, dressing to impress. Now that's a big one. That's something I'll talk about with my guest in the new year. Number 9, staying outside of the city. Yeah, I said you should stay as centrally as you can. And number 10, not embracing your inner tourist. If that sounds like a load of mumbo jumbo, go back to August's episode and listen to it. It was the top episode of the year. Came out 29th of August 2021 and was far and away the top episode of the year by quite a significant margin. Maybe it's the influence of Lena, maybe it is a catchy headline, or maybe you guys just want to know how to fit in Paris. I'm going to keep all that stuff in mind as we get into the new year and I keep making podcast episodes. But for me, I want to take the chance to thank you for listening to this show in 2021. Indeed, I want to thank everybody who has listened over the past 5 years. That's right. Very recently, this podcast had its 5-year anniversary. Very recently, it passed 2 million downloads. Wouldn't have been possible without you guys. A very special thanks to the Patreon supporters who make it all happen, who keep the wheels spinning, to all my guests who made the show much more intriguing and colourful, and a big thank you to Paris for never failing to inspire me and making it very easy to make episodes for you guys. Now, on a final note, I'm really unsure if there's going to be an episode next week or even the next week. If I am in Australia as we speak, this will be the first time I'm here in 5 years. I haven't seen my family since my wedding. A big part of me wants to just take a couple weeks off from the podcast. A big part of me wants to keep it going as well, so I can keep releasing episodes. I'll figure out based on the circumstances. So if I don't come back, have a lovely Christmas and New Year. I'll see you in 2022. If I'm back next week, you can expect it to be another kind of roundup or best of or replay episode. Anyway, merci beaucoup and au revoir, signing out for 2021.